Lieutenant Sophie Blake stared at her screen and felt her heart race. The numbers made no sense. Something huge was moving through space near the edge of the solar system. She checked the readings again, hoping she had made a mistake. But the computer showed the same thing. Large objects were coming toward Earth. She pressed the emergency button. Within minutes, Admiral Daniel Cross arrived at the monitoring station. He was a tall man in his 50s with gray hair and calm eyes. People said he never panicked, even in the worst situations. Sophie hoped that was true. The Admiral looked at her screen. His face grew serious. He asked her to show him everything. Sophie pulled up the data from the past 6 hours. The objects had appeared suddenly, as if they came out of nowhere. They were massive, much bigger than any ship humans had ever built. Admiral Cross made a call. Within an hour, the command center was full of people. Scientists, military officers, and government leaders gathered around the main display. Everyone watched as the alien fleet became visible on their cameras. The ships were dark and angular, covered in strange metal that seemed to absorb light. Dr. Michelle Torres pushed through the crowd. She was the leading expert on alien life, though until today aliens had only been a theory. She was a woman in her 40s with dark hair and intelligent eyes. She had spent her whole career preparing for this moment. But now that it was here, she felt afraid. The doctor suggested they try to communicate with the aliens. Admiral Cross agreed. They sent radio signals, light patterns, and mathematical sequences. Everything humans thought might work for first contact. For 3 hours, there was no response. Then suddenly, every screen in the command center turned on by itself. An alien face appeared. It was tall and covered in armor that looked like metal but moved like skin. Its eyes were yellow and cold. When it spoke, the computer translated its words into English. The translation was perfect. The aliens had been listening to Earth's broadcasts for years. The alien introduced itself as a commander of the Kravosh Dominion. It said the Dominion ruled over 400 worlds. It said resistance was pointless. Earth had 2 choices: surrender and become slaves, or refuse and die. They had 48 hours to decide. Dr. Torres tried to negotiate. She talked about peace and cooperation. She explained that humans wanted to be friends, not enemies. The alien commander listened without expression. Then it laughed. The sound was harsh and cruel. It said humans were primitives with primitive weapons. The Dominion had crushed civilizations far stronger than Earth. The screen went dark. The command center was silent. People looked at each other with fear in their eyes. Some started crying. Others just stared at nothing. Admiral Cross stood perfectly still, his hands behind his back. Sophie could see a vein throbbing in his temple. He was angry. The United Earth Council met in emergency session. Representatives from every nation argued about what to do. Some wanted to surrender immediately. They said fighting was suicide. Better to live as slaves than die as heroes. Others demanded resistance. They said freedom was worth any price. Admiral Cross requested permission to speak. The council chamber grew quiet. He walked to the center of the room and began to talk. His voice was steady and strong. He said humanity had faced extinction before: ice ages, plagues, wars. Every time humans had survived. Not because they were the strongest or the smartest, but because they refused to give up. He said their ancestors had climbed down from trees and walked across continents. They had built cities and civilizations. They had reached for the stars. And they had done all of this while facing creatures with bigger teeth, sharper claws, and stronger bodies. Humans had always been the underdogs, and underdogs knew how to fight dirty. The council voted. It was close, but the decision was made. Earth would buy time by pretending to negotiate. Meanwhile, every ship, every weapon, every soldier would prepare for war. Dr. Torres protested. She said lying to the aliens was dangerous. Admiral Cross looked at her with sad eyes. He said sometimes survival required hard choices. Captain Jake Morrison sat in his fighter cockpit waiting for orders. He was 32 years old and had never lost a dogfight. He was cocky and reckless, and his commanders always yelled at him for not following rules. But they kept him around because he got results. His mission was simple but dangerous. Take his wing close to the alien fleet and gather information. See what they were doing. Find their weaknesses. Jake loved dangerous missions. He strapped in and launched from the carrier with 11 other fighters behind him. They flew in complete silence, their engines barely running. The alien fleet grew larger as they approached. Jake had never seen anything so massive. The smallest alien ship was bigger than Earth's largest carrier. And there were thousands of them, hanging in space like dark metal mountains. His sensors picked up movement. The aliens were deploying smaller craft. They moved in perfect formation, spreading out around Earth. Jake realized what he was seeing. These were not cargo ships or transport vessels. These were weapons platforms. The aliens were setting up to bombard the planet from orbit. He took photos and readings, his hands moving quickly over the controls. His co-pilot warned him they were getting too close. The aliens would detect them soon. Jake agreed and ordered his wing to turn back. But as they started to leave, alarms screamed. The aliens had spotted them. Enemy fighters launched from the nearest ship. They were fast, much faster than human craft. Jake pushed his engines to maximum and ran. Two of his pilots were not quick enough. The alien weapons turned them into clouds of debris in seconds. Jake swore and flew harder, his fighter shaking from the strain. They made it back to the carrier with 4 fighters lost. Jake climbed out of his cockpit, his hands shaking from adrenaline. He reported what he had seen to Admiral Cross. The bombardment platforms were almost ready. The 48-hour deadline was not for negotiation. It was a countdown to annihilation. That night, Sophie Blake could not sleep. She sat in her quarters, looking at pictures of her family on Earth. Her parents, her younger brother, her friends. They were all down there, going about their lives. Most did not even know about the alien threat yet. The government was keeping it secret to prevent panic. She thought about the Kravosh commander's words. 400 conquered worlds, hundreds of civilizations destroyed or enslaved. Some of them had probably been more advanced than Earth. They had better weapons, better ships, and they had still lost. What chance did humans have? But then she remembered Admiral Cross's speech. Humans were survivors. They did not need to be the strongest. They just needed to be stubborn enough to keep fighting. She thought about her ancestors, the ones who had survived wars and disasters. They had never given up. Neither would she. Dr. Torres worked through the night in her laboratory. She studied every piece of data they had on the Kravosh, their language, their ships, their behavior. She was looking for anything that might help. Any weakness, any pattern, any clue. She found something interesting. The Kravosh database showed records of hundreds of conquests, but in every case the target species had surrendered after a show of force. The Kravosh had never fought a long war. They won through intimidation and overwhelming power. They expected quick victories. She took her findings to Admiral Cross. He read her report and smiled grimly. The aliens were bullies, and bullies did not know how to handle enemies who fought back. He called a meeting of his senior staff. They had 36 hours left. It was time to plan their defense. All across Earth and the colonies, people prepared for war. Factories worked around the clock making ammunition. Scientists rushed to complete experimental weapons. Soldiers said goodbye to their families. Everyone knew the odds were terrible. But they also knew surrender was not an option. Humans had decided to fight, and when humans got mad, they fought dirty. The countdown clock showed 24 hours remaining. Admiral Cross stood in the war room, surrounded by holographic displays of the solar system. Red dots marked enemy positions. Blue dots showed human forces. There were far more red than blue. Commander Lisa Grant arrived from Mars with her fleet. She was a tough woman in her 40s, who had spent years fighting pirates in the asteroid belt. She knew how to win with limited resources. Her ships were old and patched together, but her crews were the best in the system. She joined the strategy meeting and looked at the tactical display. The numbers were brutal. Earth had 347 warships. The Kravosh had over 2,000, and each one was more powerful than anything humans had built. Commander Grant shook her head and laughed bitterly. She said they were going to need a miracle. Dr. Nathan Kim was brought into the meeting. He was a thin man with messy hair and excited eyes. He ran a secret weapons lab on the dark side of the moon. Most people thought his ideas were crazy. But Admiral Cross had learned to listen to crazy ideas. The scientist explained his projects. He had been working on them for years, hoping they would never be needed. Now he was glad he had not listened to the people who called him paranoid. His first weapon was simple. Take old mining ships and attach nuclear pulse drives. Turn them into missiles that could reach a fraction of light speed. The kinetic energy alone would be devastating. His second project was even more radical. The asteroid belt was full of mining charges used to break up rocks. He had modified thousands of them to work as space mines. They could be scattered throughout the battle zone. invisible to sensors until they exploded. Finally, he showed them his masterpiece, a railgun system that could fire projectiles at incredible speeds. The guns were crude compared to alien plasma weapons, but physics did not care about sophistication. A chunk of metal moving fast enough could punch through any armor. Admiral Cross studied the weapons with growing hope. They were not elegant. They were not advanced, but they might work. He approved all of Dr. Kim's projects and ordered immediate deployment. The scientist hurried away to prepare his weapons, muttering calculations under his breath. Commander Grant had her own ideas. She explained that Martian miners had been working in the asteroid belt for decades. They knew how to move large objects through space. She proposed using rocks as weapons. Not sophisticated, but effective. Drop enough asteroids on an enemy fleet and they would have to scatter. Captain Jake Morrison listened to all the plans and grinned. He liked the way these people thought. Forget playing fair. Forget fighting the way the enemy expected. Hit them with everything all at once from every direction. Make them confused and angry. Angry enemies made mistakes. The plan came together quickly. The human fleet would engage the Kravosh head-on, drawing their attention. Meanwhile, automated drones would swarm from hidden positions. The aliens would waste ammunition shooting at cheap robots while human fighters closed in. Once close, launch nuclear missiles. Make every shot count, Dr. Torres protested. She said attacking first would make humans look like the aggressors. Admiral Cross cut her off. He said the Kravosh had already placed weapons platforms around Earth. They had already declared their intention to enslave or kill everyone. There was no moral high ground here. There was only survival. With 12 hours left on the deadline, the human fleet launched. Every ship that could fly was in the formation. Military vessels, armed cargo haulers, even civilian ships retrofitted with weapons. It was not an impressive fleet by galactic standards, but it was everything humanity had. The Kravosh detected them immediately. Alien communications showed amusement. The primitive species was actually going to fight. How entertaining. The alien commander ordered his ships to form up. He would crush this rebellion quickly and make an example of Earth. The battle began at maximum range. Kravosh plasma cannons lit up space with green fire. Human ships scattered, their shields flaring as they absorbed hits. 3 ships exploded in the first minute, then 5 more. The human formation started to break apart under the assault, but the scattering was deliberate. Admiral Cross had learned from studying animal behavior. When a school of fish faces a predator, it scatters in all directions. The predator gets confused, not knowing which target to chase. The same principle worked in space. As the Kravosh ship spread out to chase multiple targets, the second part of the plan activated. Thousands of drones poured out of hidden positions among the asteroids. They were simple machines, barely more than engines with transmitters. But there were so many of them that they overwhelmed enemy sensors. The aliens started shooting at everything that moved. Their accuracy dropped as they tried to track too many targets at once. Automated defense systems went into overdrive, wasting ammunition on cheap drones. Captain Morrison saw his opening and shouted into his radio. All fighters, attack now. His wing dove through the chaos, using the drones as cover. They flew in tight formation, weaving between enemy fire. Jake's hands danced over the controls, his fighter responding like an extension of his body. He had trained his whole life for this moment. He was not going to waste it. They reached attack range of a Kravosh capital ship. It was massive, covered in weapons and armor. Jake armed his missiles and waited for the perfect moment. His targeting computer locked on. He fired everything he had. 8 nuclear-tipped missiles streaked toward the alien vessel. The Kravosh tried to shoot down the missiles. Their point defense systems destroyed 5, but 3 got through. They detonated against the ship's shields in rapid succession. The first 2 overloaded the shields. The third hit the hull directly. The explosion was visible from Earth. The alien capital ship broke apart, its reactor going critical. Secondary explosions rippled along its length. Debris spread in all directions. The mighty vessel that had conquered dozens of worlds died in fire and silence. For a moment, the battle seemed to pause. Both sides stared at what had happened. The humans were shocked that it had worked. The Kravosh were shocked that they had lost a ship. Then the fighting resumed with renewed fury. Lieutenant Sophie Blake monitored communications from the command ship. She heard confusion in the alien chatter. The Kravosh commanders were arguing. Some wanted to retreat and regroup. Others demanded immediate revenge. The unity in their formation was breaking down. Admiral Cross saw the opportunity and ordered a full assault. Human ships charged forward, firing everything they had. Railgun projectiles tore through space. Nuclear missiles left trails of light. Even the old chemical rockets were launched, turning obsolete weapons into kinetic hammers. The Cravache fought back viciously. Their weapons were superior, and they had numbers on their side. More human ships died. The carrier horizon was cut in half by plasma fire. The cruiser Defiance rammed an enemy destroyer when its weapons failed. Both ships vanished in a ball of nuclear fire. Commander Grant led the Mars fleet in a flanking maneuver. Her ships appeared from behind the moon, catching a group of Cravache vessels by surprise. She personally commanded the attack, her voice calm despite the chaos. Her miners had trained in the hardest environment in the solar system. They knew how to handle themselves in a fight. Dr. Kim's space mines began detonating throughout the battle zone. The Cravache had been maneuvering freely, confident in their superior speed. Now they flew into invisible traps. Explosions blossomed randomly, damaging shields and destroying smaller craft. The aliens became cautious, slowing their advance. After 6 hours of brutal combat, Admiral Cross made the hardest decision of his life. He ordered a retreat. The human fleet had lost 89 ships. Nearly a quarter of their total force was gone. They could not sustain this level of casualties. They needed to fall back, regroup, and learn from this first battle. But as they withdrew, Sophie Blake compiled the damage reports from both sides. The numbers made her gasp. The humans had lost heavily, but the Cravache had lost 43 ships destroyed and hundreds damaged. For every human vessel lost, they had killed nearly half an alien ship. Those were not the numbers of a hopeless fight. More importantly, they had bought time. Earth was no longer facing imminent bombardment. The Cravache had pulled back their weapons platforms to defend their fleet. The aliens had learned a hard lesson. Conquering Earth was not going to be easy. Captain Morrison landed on the carrier with half his wing. The other pilots were either dead or limping back to base on damaged ships. He was exhausted and his hands were shaking. But he was smiling. They had bloodied the enemy's nose. They had proved humans could fight back. And more importantly, they had shown the Cravache that this war was going to cost them dearly. 3 months had passed since the first battle. The war had settled into a grinding stalemate. The Cravache controlled most of the space around Earth, but they could not land their troops without suffering terrible losses. Humanity held the ground, but they could not break the blockade. Dr. Michelle Torres worked in a laboratory deep underground. She had changed since the war began. The peaceful scientist who believed in diplomacy was gone. In her place was someone harder, someone who understood that sometimes the only language bullies understood was force. She studied pieces of destroyed Cravache ships. Every fragment was precious, a chance to understand the enemy's technology. Her team worked around the clock, taking apart alien systems and figuring out how they worked. It was slow, frustrating work, but small breakthroughs were happening. The biggest discovery came from Lieutenant Sophie Blake. She had been monitoring alien communications, learning their language and codes. One day she intercepted something interesting. The Cravache were reporting to their home worlds about the situation at Earth, and the reports were not confident. Sophie brought the translated messages to Admiral Cross. The alien commanders were worried. Other conquered species were watching Earth's resistance with great interest. Some were asking questions. If primitive humans could fight back, why should they remain slaves? The Dominion needed to crush Earth quickly before rebellion spread. The Admiral realized what this meant. Earth was not just fighting for itself anymore. Every day the planet held out was a message to the galaxy. The Cravache were not invincible. Their empire could be resisted. This changed everything. They just needed to survive long enough for that message to spread. The Cravache responded to their political problems by sending more ships. Their fleet doubled in size. New vessels arrived every week, each one eager to be part of the conquest. The alien commanders promised their troops that Earth would fall within a month. It was time to end this embarrassment. Captain Jake Morrison adapted to the new situation. His tactics became stranger and more desperate. He used damaged ships as decoys. He hid fighters inside cargo containers. He even once strapped rockets to an asteroid and crashed it into an enemy formation. Nothing was off limits if it killed aliens. His squadron loved him. They called themselves Morrison's Madmen. They painted wild designs on their fighters and developed a reputation for impossible missions. When command needed something insane done, they called Jake. He never said no. He just asked how many enemy ships he could take down while doing it. Meanwhile, Dr. Nathan Kim made a crucial breakthrough. He figured out how Kravosh shields worked. They operated on specific frequencies, rotating through patterns to defend against different weapons. But he found that strong electromagnetic pulses could disrupt the rotation. The shields would not fail completely, but they would weaken for a few seconds. It was not much. A few seconds was barely enough time to target and fire. But it was something. Human weapons could now hurt alien ships that were previously untouchable. Dr. Kim's discovery was rushed into production. Every human ship was equipped with EMP generators. The playing field was starting to level just a little. On Earth, people prepared for the worst. The Kravosh had announced they would attempt a ground invasion. They would land armies in major cities and force humanity to surrender. Colonel Tracy Palmer was put in charge of ground defense. She was a veteran of the Mars independence conflicts, experienced in guerrilla warfare. Colonel Palmer had a simple philosophy. Make every meter of ground cost the enemy blood. Turn every building into a fortress. Never fight fair. She trained civilian volunteers, teaching them how to make improvised weapons and set ambushes. If the aliens wanted Earth, they would have to take it one building at a time. Among her volunteers was a man named Alex Chen. He was an engineer who had never held a gun before the war. But he was good with his hands and smart about problem solving. Palmer recognized his talent and made him a squad leader. She said the best soldiers were not always the biggest or the strongest. Sometimes they were just the ones who refused to quit. The invasion began on a Tuesday morning. Kravosh dropships descended on Sydney, Australia. The city had been evacuated, but soldiers and volunteers had stayed behind. They waited in hiding as alien troops marched through the streets. The Kravosh were huge, covered in powered armor, carrying weapons that could level buildings. Colonel Palmer gave the signal. Explosives detonated throughout the city. Buildings collapsed on alien formations. Sniper fire came from unexpected directions. Hidden guns fired from sewers and tunnels. The Kravosh had superior technology, but they were fighting in an environment humans had designed as a trap. Alex Chen led his squad through the subway tunnels. They carried explosives made from mining charges and fertilizer. Their job was to destroy an alien command post. It was a suicide mission. They all knew it, but they went anyway because someone had to. They reached the target building through underground passages. The Kravosh had set up their headquarters in what used to be a shopping mall. Alien commanders coordinated their troops from inside, confident they were safe behind their shields and guards. They did not expect humans to attack from below. Alex and his squad planted charges throughout the building's foundation. They worked quickly and quietly, aware that discovery meant death. One of the charges was set incorrectly and started beeping. An alien guard heard the sound and came to investigate. Alex's teammate shot the guard with a captured alien weapon. The alarm went up. They ran for their lives through the tunnels as enemy troops poured into the building above. Alex counted down in his head. 5 seconds, 4, 3, 2, 1. The charges detonated simultaneously. The entire building collapsed, taking the Kravosh command post and everyone inside it with it. The loss of their commanders threw the invasion into chaos. Alien troops lost coordination. They started making mistakes, walking into ambushes, getting separated from their units. Colonel Palmer's forces hit them again and again, never stopping, never giving them time to reorganize. The battle for Sydney lasted 2 weeks. The Kravosh expected to control the city in days. Instead, they lost thousands of soldiers in brutal street fighting. Eventually, they retreated back to their ships, leaving behind equipment and bodies. They had learned a terrible lesson. Humans would not surrender no matter how hopeless things looked. Admiral Cross watched reports of the ground battle with grim satisfaction. The invasion had failed. More importantly, every day of fighting was being broadcast across the galaxy. Sophie Blake had figured out how to hijack Kravosh communication networks. Now millions of enslaved species were watching humans fight back. He recorded a message and had Sophie broadcast it on all frequencies. The Admiral looked into the camera and spoke directly to the conquered peoples of the galaxy. He said Earth was drawing a line. The Kravosh Dominion thought it could take whatever it wanted, but humans were proving them wrong. And if primitive Earth could resist, so could anyone. The message ended with a simple challenge. Come to Earth if you want our world. Bring your armies and your weapons. We will be waiting. And when you get here, you will learn what it means to fight someone who has nothing left to lose. Dr. Torres made another discovery while examining captured equipment. The Kravosh had been suppressing technology across their empire for centuries. Some species they had conquered had actually been more advanced than them, but the Dominion destroyed their weapons and their knowledge, keeping them weak and controllable. The Empire maintained power through fear and lies. She brought this information to the command staff. Admiral Cross saw the opportunity immediately. They could not just fight the Kravosh. They needed to destroy the myth of Kravosh invincibility, show the galaxy that the Empire was built on deception, turn military resistance into ideological war. Sophie Blake began broadcasting the evidence across every channel she could reach. Technical specifications, historical records, proof that the Dominion had been lying for generations. The response was immediate. Riots broke out on conquered worlds. Underground resistance movements went public. The empire that had looked so strong was starting to crack. The Kravosh commanders were furious. They demanded immediate reinforcements to crush both Earth and the spreading rebellions. But their homeworlds were dealing with their own problems now. Resources were stretched thin. The war that was supposed to be a quick conquest had become a threat to the entire Dominion. 6 months into the war, everything changed. Ambassador Victoria Stone arrived at the command center with unexpected news. She was a former diplomat who had spent her career building coalitions. Now she had built one that might save humanity. She had made contact with resistance movements on 12 different worlds. These were species that the Kravosh had conquered decades or centuries ago. They had been watching Earth's fight with growing hope. Now they wanted to help. They could not send armies, but they could send supplies, intelligence, and something even more valuable: knowledge. Admiral Cross met with representatives from these species through secure channels. Some were humanoid, others were completely alien, but they all shared the same enemy. They all hated the Kravosh Dominion. They all wanted freedom. Earth had given them hope. Now they would give Earth a fighting chance. One representative stood out. His name was Krelvar, and he was actually a Kravosh, but he had defected from the Dominion military, disgusted by the Empire's brutality. He carried with him detailed information about Kravosh fleet deployments, command structures, and most importantly, their weaknesses. Krelvar explained that the Dominion was not as strong as it appeared. The fleet at Earth represented nearly 1/3 of their total military strength. They had committed so many ships here because they needed to crush humanity quickly. If this fleet was destroyed or trapped, the entire empire would collapse. The admiral listened carefully to every word. This was the opportunity he had been waiting for, not just to defend Earth, but to win the war completely. He called together his senior staff and laid out a new strategy. They would not just fight anymore. They would attack with everything they had and destroy the invasion fleet entirely. Dr. Nathan Kim revealed his final secret project. For months, he had been deploying satellites throughout Earth's orbit. But these were not communication satellites. They were weapons, railgun platforms disguised as space debris, hidden among the wreckage from earlier battles. He had been slowly building a network of firepower that could deliver devastating strikes. The satellites were ready. They could fire projectiles at incredible speeds, fast enough that shields designed to stop energy weapons would be useless. Physics did not care about advanced technology. A chunk of metal moving at a fraction of light speed would punch through anything. But to use the railgun network effectively, they needed to break through Kravosh communication security. They needed access to enemy targeting systems, shield frequencies, and command codes. This required something desperate. They needed to capture an enemy capital ship intact. Captain Jake Morrison volunteered to lead the mission. He had lost too many friends in this war. He had seen too many good people die. Now he wanted revenge. He would capture that ship or die trying. Probably die, but at least he would go out fighting. His plan was insane. Use his entire fighter wing as bait to draw the dreadnought away from the main fleet. Once isolated, they would board it. Human Marines would fight through corridors designed for aliens twice their size. They would capture the command center and download everything before the Kravosh could respond. Admiral Cross approved the mission. He did not like sending people on suicide runs. But wars were won by people willing to sacrifice everything for victory. He shook Jake's hand and told him to come back alive. Jake just smiled and said he would try his best. The operation began at dawn. Morrison's madmen launched from their carrier and flew straight at the Krevosh battle line. They were obvious targets moving in formation, broadcasting their positions. The aliens took the bait. One dreadnought broke formation to pursue them. It was exactly what Jake had planned. The fighters scattered as the dreadnought opened fire. 3 pilots died in the first volley. Jake led the survivors in a wild chase, ducking behind asteroids and derelict ships. He needed to keep the enemy focused on him while the boarding team got into position. The boarding craft was a modified cargo shuttle, heavily armored and filled with Marines. They approached the dreadnought from behind, using the ship's own bulk to hide from its sensors. When they got close enough, they attached to the hull and began cutting through. Inside the Krevosh ship, alarms screamed. The aliens had detected the breach. Security teams rushed to the entry point, weapons ready, but the Marines were already inside, fighting desperately in narrow corridors. Human weapons were designed for human-sized targets. Against the massive Krevosh soldiers, they needed to be precise and fast. The fighting was brutal and close. Marines used explosives to bring down armored aliens. They threw grenades around corners. They fought with knives when their ammunition ran out. Every meter was paid for in blood. But they kept moving forward, pushing toward the command center. Jake watched from his fighter as the battle unfolded inside the ship. He had lost 8 more pilots, keeping the dreadnought distracted. Only 3 of his wing remained. But the Marines were almost at their objective. He just needed to buy them a few more minutes. The Marines breached the command center. The Krevosh officers inside tried to wipe their computers, but Lieutenant Sophie Blake had given the team a virus designed to prevent that. She was monitoring from Earth, guiding them through the alien systems. They plugged in their equipment and started downloading. 2 minutes. That was all Sophie needed. 2 minutes to copy command codes, fleet positions, shield frequencies, and communication protocols. The Marines held the door against waves of enemy reinforcements. They fired until their weapons overheated. They dragged wounded comrades behind cover. They refused to retreat. Sophie shouted that she had everything. The Marines began their escape, fighting back toward their boarding craft. Half of them did not make it. The Krevosh were pouring troops into the corridor, determined to stop the intruders. But the survivors reached their shuttle and launched, escaping just as the dreadnought's reactors went critical from battle damage. The codes worked perfectly. Sophie used them to infiltrate the entire Krevosh communication network. She could see everything the enemy fleet was doing. She could even send false orders and create confusion. The advantage was enormous. For the first time in the war, humans knew exactly what the aliens were planning. Admiral Cross made his decision. It was time for the final battle. He ordered every ship to prepare for a full offensive. This would be the decisive moment. Either humanity would break the invasion fleet, or they would die trying. There was no middle ground anymore. The attack began with Sophie sending false orders throughout the Krevosh fleet. Ships moved to wrong positions. Defense systems went offline for maintenance that was never scheduled. Communication channels got jammed with contradictory commands. The alien formation started to break apart in confusion. Then Dr. Kim's railgun satellites opened fire. Hundreds of projectiles streaked through space at incredible speeds. They hit shields that were not designed to stop solid objects moving that fast. Alien ships that had seemed invulnerable started taking damage. Armor cracked. Hulls breached. The mighty Krevosh were bleeding. The human fleet charged forward at full speed. They had nothing left to lose. Every ship fired everything it had. Nuclear missiles, railgun rounds, plasma torpedoes, even old-fashioned chemical rockets. The volume of fire was overwhelming. The aliens had better weapons, but humans had desperation. Commander Lisa Grant's Mars fleet appeared from hiding in the asteroid belt. They had been waiting for this moment. Engines cold, systems silent. Now they came alive and blocked the Krevosh retreat path. The aliens suddenly found themselves trapped between 2 human forces. The battle raged for 18 hours. Ships exploded on both sides. Space was filled with debris and bodies. Entire squadrons were wiped out in seconds. But slowly, inevitably, the tide turned. The Krevosh were being destroyed. The alien commanders realized they had lost. They tried to retreat, but Commander Grant's fleet was in their way. They tried to regroup, but Sophie's false orders kept them confused. They tried to fight back, but Dr. Kim's railguns never stopped firing. For the first time in the Dominion's history, a Krevosh fleet faced total defeat. When the smoke cleared, the numbers were staggering. Humanity had lost over 200 ships, but the Kravash invasion fleet had been shattered. Of the 4,000 vessels that came to conquer Earth, fewer than 600 escaped. The rest were destroyed or captured. The mighty Dominion had been broken. Admiral Cross stood on the bridge of his battered flagship and watched the surviving alien ships flee. He felt no joy in victory. Too many good people had died. But they had won. Against all odds, against superior technology and overwhelming numbers, humans had won. The invasion was over. 1 year after the Battle of Earth, the galaxy was a different place. The Kravash Dominion had collapsed into civil war. Species that had been enslaved for generations rose up and fought for freedom. The empire that had seemed eternal crumbled in months. Admiral Daniel Cross stood in his new office overlooking the rebuilt command center. He had been promoted to Supreme Commander of the United Earth Defense Force. His hair was grayer now, and new lines marked his face. The war had aged him, but his eyes were still sharp and determined. His mission was not to build an empire. Earth had no interest in conquering other worlds. Instead, he focused on building the Galactic Defense Coalition. It was a voluntary alliance of free species committed to protecting each other. Any world that wanted peace and independence could join. No fees, no tribute, no demands. Just mutual defense and respect. The coalition was growing quickly. 47 species had joined in the first year. They came from across the galaxy, each one bringing their own technology and knowledge. Humanity shared everything they had learned about fighting the Kravash. In return, allied species helped Earth develop technologies that had been suppressed by the Dominion. Dr. Michelle Torres had become humanity's chief diplomat. She traveled between worlds, building relationships and establishing protocols for peaceful contact. Her experiences in the war had taught her that peace required constant effort and attention. It was harder than fighting in some ways, but it was worth the work. Her greatest achievement was the Treaty of Sol. It was signed by representatives from 112 species. The treaty guaranteed sovereignty and self-determination for all worlds. It banned conquest and enslavement. It established mechanisms for resolving disputes peacefully. Most importantly, it said that no species should ever face extinction or slavery again. Captain Jake Morrison had survived the war, though just barely. He had been wounded 3 times and lost most of his original squadron, but he was still flying. Now he commanded the 1st Mixed Species Fighter Wing. Pilots from a dozen different worlds trained under his leadership. His unconventional tactics were now studied at military academies across the galaxy. Other species wanted to learn how humans had defeated superior technology. Jake taught them everything. How to fight dirty, how to turn weaknesses into strengths, how to never give up, even when victory seemed impossible. When journalists asked him about humanity's success, he always gave the same answer. Humans were too stubborn to know when they were beaten. That stubbornness had saved Earth, and now it was helping to save the galaxy. Lieutenant Sophie Blake had become head of the Galactic Intelligence Network. Her job was to ensure that no empire could ever again suppress information to maintain power. She created a decentralized system that no single government could control. Every species contributed data and every species had access to it. The network shared technology, history, and scientific discoveries freely. Species that the Kravash had kept ignorant for centuries suddenly had access to knowledge that had been stolen from them. It sparked a renaissance across the galaxy. New inventions appeared every day. Old mysteries were solved. The flow of information became unstoppable. Commander Lisa Grant oversaw the reconstruction of Mars and the expansion of human colonies. But humans were no longer alone in the solar system. Allied species had been invited to establish their own colonies. Mars now had neighborhoods where 3 different alien races lived alongside humans. Earth orbit was filled with ships from dozens of worlds. The diversity brought challenges. Different species had different needs and customs, but it also brought incredible opportunities. Trade flourished. Cultural exchange programs sent human students to alien worlds and brought alien scholars to Earth. The isolation that had defined humanity for millennia was gone forever. Dr. Nathan Kim shifted his focus from weapons to peaceful applications. His railgun technology was adapted for launching cargo into space cheaply. His mining charges helped terraform barren worlds. His greatest contribution was helping other species recover technologies the Dominion had suppressed. He traveled from world to world, teaching and learning. Colonel Tracy Palmer trained peacekeeping forces for the coalition. Liberated worlds needed to defend themselves against pirates, warlords, and remnants of the Old Dominion. She established training centers on 20 different planets. Her methods combined human guerrilla tactics with alien technologies. The result was frighteningly effective. Alex Chen became her second in command. The civilian engineer who had never held a gun was now a respected military instructor. He specialized in improvised weapons and tactics. His classes were always popular because he proved that ordinary people could defend themselves against anyone. You did not need to be a soldier to be a hero. Ambassador Victoria Stone brokered peace treaties and trade agreements throughout the galaxy. The network of alliances she built was impressive. Former enemies learned to cooperate. Species that had never met before formed partnerships. The galaxy was becoming a community rather than a collection of isolated worlds. Krelvar, the defector whose intelligence had helped turn the tide of war, became a symbol of redemption. He worked alongside Dr. Torres, helping former Dominion soldiers reintegrate into peaceful society. Many Kravash had been drafted into service against their will. Now they needed help finding new purposes in a changed galaxy. His efforts were not always successful. Some former Dominion soldiers refused to accept that their empire was gone. They formed pirate bands and attacked shipping. But most chose peace. They were tired of war. They wanted to build rather than destroy. Krelvar gave them that chance. On the first anniversary of the victory, Earth held a memorial service. Millions gathered at sites across the planet to honor those who had died defending humanity's freedom. Admiral Cross delivered the main speech at the monument in Geneva. World leaders and alien ambassadors stood behind him as he spoke. He talked about the price of liberty. He spoke of ordinary people who became heroes. Farmers and factory workers who picked up weapons and fought. Scientists who turned their knowledge toward saving their world. Soldiers who gave their lives so others could live in freedom. He said their sacrifice had changed the galaxy forever. He reminded everyone that freedom was not free. It required vigilance. It required courage. It required people willing to stand up and say no to tyranny. Humanity had done that, and now they were helping other species learn to do the same. The fight against oppression never truly ended, but it could be won, one world at a time. After the ceremony, Dr. Torres knelt down to speak with a young child who had asked a question. The girl wanted to know if the war was really over. Dr. Torres smiled gently and explained that peace must be defended every day. But yes, the invasion was over. Earth was safe. Humanity was free. The child asked what made humanity special. Why had they succeeded when other species fell? Dr. Torres considered the question carefully. She could have talked about tactics or technology. She could have mentioned the brilliant strategies or the innovative weapons, but those were not the real answer. She explained that humanity was not special because of what they had. They were special because of what they refused to accept. When faced with impossible odds and certain defeat, they looked at the universe and said no, not today, not ever. They refused to kneel. They refused to surrender. They got mad and they fought back. That attitude, that stubbornness, that absolute refusal to give up was what saved Earth. And now that same spirit was spreading across the galaxy. Other species were learning that they did not have to accept tyranny. They could fight back. They could win. Humanity had shown them the way. The final scene showed Earth from orbit. The planet was surrounded by defensive stations built by a dozen species working together. Ships from across the galaxy came and went, bringing trade and friendship. The world that had once been threatened with extinction had become a beacon of hope and freedom. Humanity had not just survived the invasion. They had changed the galaxy forever. The Kravash Dominion was gone, replaced by a coalition of free worlds. Slavery was ending across hundreds of planets. Species that had lived in fear for centuries now looked to the stars with hope. And it all started because one planet refused to surrender. One species got mad and decided to fight. The invasion started. Humanity got mad and the galaxy was never the same. In the years to come, historians would study the war and debate what made the difference. But people who lived through it knew the truth. Humans did not win because they were stronger or smarter. They won because they were too stubborn to quit. They won because ordinary people did extraordinary things. They won because when the universe tried to break them, they refused to break. And that lesson would echo across the stars for generations to come. Earth had drawn a line in the sand and defended it. The Kravosh had learned too late that some species cannot be conquered. Some spirits cannot be broken, and humanity, for all their faults and weaknesses, had proven that freedom was worth any price. The galaxy was better for it.